Hey everybody, welcome back to the Loth-Wolf pack. This is Chris bringing you another Covert Missions deck tech. Today we're taking a look at a new legendary Director Krennic, the Death Star Mastermind. So for me, Director Krennic is one of the most exciting characters to be released in Covert Missions. So how can we best get Krennic and a couple partners of his to construct the Death Star? So let's dive into my first deck idea for the new Death Star Mastermind. Before we talk about Director Krennic's partners, the Imperial Death Trooper and Snoke's Praetorian Guard, we should introduce the Constructing the Death Star plot, which is our main win condition, how we are winning the game. Construct the Death Star is a 2-point plot. It says, action, remove 2 of your dice, each showing a resource, to place 2 resources on this plot. Then if you have 15 or more resources on this plot, you win the game. So we're not doing damage, we're not milling the opponent, we are trying to get resource die in the pool, remove them to place the resources on the Death Star plot, and get up to 15. So with the basis of the win condition in mind, goal number 1 of this deck every round is to take as little damage as possible, which is why I decided to include the Imperial Death Trooper, which has Guardian while you control Director Krennic, and then along with the Death Trooper to add access to blue, we have another pseudo Guardian in Snoke's Praetorian Guard, which says after you activate this character, you may remove one of its character dice showing damage to remove a die showing damage with a value of 2 or less. So clearly not as good as just straight up Guardian, but you know, Snoke's Praetorian Guard is kind of a second character that has quote unquote Guardian. So either possibly when you activate him, he can remove a die of damage showing 2 or less, or it's going to be a shield or a resource. So not including the blank, obviously, let's just pretend that doesn't exist. But when you sequence out the guard, you're going to wait until your opponent has a die showing damage, and then when you do that, either you're going to get to remove it with his ability, or you'll have a shield, or you'll have a resource. So any of these options are going to be ideal to keep us alive, protecting the Death Star Mastermind himself, Director Krennic, which reduces our Death Star plot by 1, which allows us to play 29 points, which is 13 right here for Krennic, 8 for the Death Trooper, and then 8 for the Guard. So those are just kind of the character ideas. I've seen on YouTube, I've seen some other content creators post deck lists of Krennic, Death Trooper, and Sentinel Messenger. Now, let me preface, I have not watched those videos, so I have not seen how that deck plays out. But on the surface, I think in this style of deck, I don't think Sentinel Messenger is going to be as good as the Guard. You know, clearly throughout Convergence, we've seen the power of Sentinel Messenger to be able to draw you the card. He does have a focus on him, but in this deck, I don't think that sort of thing with getting the extra card is going to be as valuable as possibly being able to Guardian away dice every round with the Snoke's Praetorian Guard. So that's just my initial 2 cents. Again, I have not played or watched the Sentinel Messenger version, but I think this guy is better than Sentinel Messenger in this style of deck, where every round our main goal, don't take damage, don't die. Looking at the deck list itself, this sort of style of a true control deck hasn't really existed so much in Destiny up to this point. Mill decks kind of have the stereotype of being control decks, which in Destiny isn't actually really true. The most obvious example being Yoda, Leia, Hero, Mill. That deck is an aggro deck, but instead of trying to kill you with damage, it's trying to aggressively mill you out as fast as possible. The villain mill deck, that hasn't really existed at all throughout the post Awakenings block of Destiny. Throughout Legacies and throughout Convergence, villain mill hasn't really been a viable strategy whatsoever. So this sort of thing is pretty exciting as far as exploring a new type of way to play, which is why when you look at the deck list, I have a lot of one-ofs in here, or not a lot, but there's a few one-ofs because in this sort of reactive style of deck, it's really hard to say exactly what kinds of answers and what kinds of things you want in your deck before you can get some reps in and kind of see how the deck plays out. For example, I have in one Viper Probe Droid, which is the new like pseudo suppressive fire sort of thing for villains. But with our deck having the Guardian on the Death Trooper, possibly having Guardian on the Praetorian Guard, and also having just a decent amount of regular removal as it is, Under Fire, Hidden Motive, Forsaken. It is possible, especially considering this Death Trooper, that maybe you can shave down on one of these removal cards, maybe add in something like Stifle to kind of stop your opponent from removing your own dice as opposed to you trying to remove damage dice, because maybe you don't need as many of these as you think. So, that's just kind of a general example. Something like Nature's Charm. I've in the past, and I've tried to play Villain Mill last season during Spark of Hope. You need things to help you interact with multiple dice. And in a deck that really doesn't have a ton of money, like granted you're going to have logistics, but you're also going to want to have your money sides to put on the Death Star. So again, until you get to play the deck, it's hard to say exactly how much money you're going to have available, which is why something like Nature's Charm is why I just have one of in here as an idea. Because it's a zero cost way to make your opponent reroll. And also in this style of deck, if you're able to pressure your opponent's hand with finding discard on Krennic, it puts your opponent in a spot where they're not going to have many options to discard to reroll if you can reroll their two best dice to non-optimal sides from hitting with the Nature's Charm. So, like I said, there is a lot of things in this list that could be changed or modified based on how the deck plays out. But I think the general shell, the idea of the shell, is pretty valid, and I think a lot of the cards are probably going to stay in, but there's probably 5, 6, 7 slots that could probably be tinkered around with. So going into the list itself, one of the spiciest numbers that I want to try out is Nexus of Power, which is a card that's seen zero play. But with the constructing the Death Star needing to have resource sides, I think this is something we definitely should try, at least initially. It's an automatic resource die on the table for one resource every round. And then with blue, we also get access to Crystal Ball, which is a cool upgrade that has 2 resource sides and 2 focus on it. Exactly what we want to have in this style of deck. And I also included Macro Binoculars, which is a pretty hilarious card. But in this style of deck, this card is exactly what you want. It's 2 resource sides, or you're getting a shield from the special, and full hand knowledge of what your opponent has. So, again, the idea of the deck is remove your opponent's dice, get into their hand with counterintelligence, get into their hand with probe, try to limit their options of what they can do. Maybe Krennic finds you a discard to also pressure your opponent and take away their options. And then once you have kind of done that, generally speaking, you're going to have, it's kind of like a support deck to where then you kind of have a lot of actions left over to do, and your opponent is kind of just done and they don't have anything left over. All their dice are either resolved, removed, or they're left over on non-optimal sides, and they have no focus left and they have no discard to reroll left. So then you're kind of just left and be able to finish your turn and round however you want to focus up all your resource sides and put them on the Death Star plot itself. Quickly touching on 2 of the new upgrades from Covert Missions, being Director and Death Star plans. First, we'll talk about Director. I think this card is going to be really, really, really key to have in your opening hand. For you to get some tempo to push ahead to advance your win condition. So I feel like, now again, let me back up and just say I have not played this deck. I've seen people post videos of it, so if you've watched these videos, you probably have a better idea than I do. But in the games when you have Director in your opening hand, these games I feel like you're going to be doing pretty good. In games when you don't have Director, it's going to be interesting to see if you can keep up with the damage output of your opponent before your characters go down. Just kind of see, what the parity level is there of staying even with your opponent or trying to stay ahead. And then the Death Star plans. I kind of look at this card as being an end of round, kind of like how the Ewok deck uses the battlefield, what was that called? Arena of Death, to double claim out, at the end of the round to finish off an opponent. As I alluded to before, if you are slower than your opponent and you have more actions left over, you can just sit on this card in your hand until your opponent claims the battlefield, and then when they claim, this is an automatic 2 resources to put on the Death Star plot, because at the end of your turn, or end of your round, you play this down, you exhaust it to put a resource on it, and then at the beginning of the next round, your opponent, unless they have some sort of ambush action sheet card, they're not going to be able to damage your character to steal the plans back. So you get to again then put another resource, on the Death Star plot. So if you can get up to 13 and then sneakily just slam this down at the end of a round, you're going to win the game. So I think these are 2 pretty cool cards that'll be fun to explore. And again, I think Director is going to kind of be the key gas piece for you to maybe even hard mulligan for round 1. So guys, to kind of close up the video here, I'm really excited to try this style of deck. If you missed one of our podcasts, I think it was maybe episode 12 or episode 13, I kind of went into a little spiel about how I've been trying to play Villain Mill since like last fall, maybe like September-ish, and it just doesn't work. Like the Villain Mill, you're not able to quickly, aggressively mill out your opponent, and you just sit there and die, and you can't mill them out fast enough. So I think this is going to be a really exciting way to kind of explore a control style of deck that you don't have to waste 10 card slots on inefficient villain mill. You can just, again, load up your deck with stuff that has resources on it and shield up and just kind of play super defensively. And then after you kind of exhaust out your opponent, so to speak, then you get all the resources, extra die to resources, and put them on the plot. So definitely excited to try this. Probably the most excited, this is probably the deck I'm most excited to try out of Covert Missions. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, there's a lot of these cards that could potentially be changed. These are all just ideas. Maybe the Solar Sailor is too expensive. Maybe we can never play it down. Maybe we don't need the Viper Pro Druid. Maybe we don't need Stifle. Maybe we don't need Nature's Charm. Maybe there's a lot of other cards you can add in. So just a couple ideas that I was kind of glancing at. Something like this new card Standoff is exactly kind of what this deck wants, especially when you have 2 characters that have Guardian. Giving 3 shields to your team is a great thing. 3 extra health, kind of just like another Riot Shield, but kind of spread out across the board. Depending on the metagame, maybe you want a Bubble Shield. Maybe you can cut something like a hard removal card, maybe cut like an Under Fire or something, put in a Bubble Shield. Maybe after playing the deck, we realize we don't have enough money. Maybe we want to add in something like a Merchant Freighter to give us some more resources in rounds 2 and round 3. Maybe we're dying too fast and we need some shields. Maybe something like a Sandcrawler could be useful for all these shield sides and a dollar side. And even just adding extra health by getting this, Jawa junk dealer in there for a low cost of discarding 4 cards. So not the biggest deal. Maybe we need more ways to get into the opponent's hand and disrupt them with something like Face the Enemy. So those are just a couple examples, but definitely a lot of ways you can tweak this deck to suit the weaknesses after you kind of give it some reps and see, where the holes are and maybe how we can improve it. But if there is a game and a deck where we can win by resolving a nexus of power, I'm all in for that. So if you got to this point in the video, thanks for sticking with me, guys. I know I'm kind of long-winded on this deck, but like I said, very excited for it. Ready for Covert Missions on Friday the 6th, so hope you are too. But as always, thanks for watching. This has been Chris with the Loth-Wolf Pack, and we'll see you next time for some more Destiny content.